Welcome to the Construction Disruption Podcast, where we uncover the future of design, building, and remodeling.
I'm Todd Miller of Isaiah Industries, manufacturer of specialty metal roofing and other building materials. Today, my co-host is Ethan Young. Mr. Young, how are you doing?
I am doing good, Mr. Miller. How about you?
Well, also, thank you. I'm looking forward to today's show. And just so our audience knows, once again, we are doing challenge words. So both Ethan and I and our guest have a mystery word. We have been challenged by one of the others to work into the conversation. So you, the audience, can try to figure out what our mystery words are. And at the end of the show, we will tell you whether we were successful using them or not. So let's go ahead and dive right in. I actually am really excited about today's guest. This is something a little bit unusual for us, a repeat guest. We have not had too many of those in the past. And he's actually a repeat guest from our most listened to episode. So that's really exciting. Our guest today is Wolf Richter, author and founder of the very popular Wolf Street website, as well as a prolific writer and video creator. Wolf tells the stories behind business, finance, and money. Born in Germany, Wolf found himself moved to Oklahoma when he was 17 years old, and he ended up sticking around here in the States. Wolf now lives in San Francisco. With degrees from Midwestern State and Tulsa University, Wolf spent a decade managing a large Ford dealership and its subsidiaries, giving him a bit of a heart as well as knowledge for the automotive industry. But one day, nearly 30 years ago, he quit his job, went to France for 7 weeks, and then went on a life-altering 3-year journey that took him across 100 countries on all continents. In 2011, then, he started Testosterone Pit. And in 2014, he changed the name to Wolf Street, where he writes daily for the most part on many different topics, often related to business, economics, finance, and real estate, as well as automotive industry. Always interesting and informative, Wolf has a great following due to his keen insight, and what I like about him is his ability to make sense and draw conclusions about some pretty complex issues. Wolf, welcome back to Construction Disruption. Pleasure to have you here today.
Thanks for having me back, Todd.
Well, that was kind of a long introduction too, but it was well deserved. We're glad to have you here today. So when you were on the show before, I don't think we talked a whole lot about you. We kind of dove right into a lot of topics, but I'm kind of curious to kind of open us up today. Can you share with us, what was your state of mind when you left the car dealership, went to France supposedly for 7 weeks, and then started a 3-year journey around the world? What were you looking for? What was your state of mind at the time?
Well, there were a couple of things that came together. One, a good friend of mine died of brain cancer, and at a very early age, and relatively speaking, and seems a very young age now. And I wasn't even 40 then, and I thought, what if I don't make it to 40? What if I don't make it to 50? And so that started a process where I started questioning what I was doing. And then I was ultimately frustrated with the franchise dealer business. I was frustrated with Ford Motor Company. They have never had management that can manage itself out of a paper bag. And it is just incredible, the stuff that they decide. And I didn't want to spend the rest of my life doing that, and I didn't know what else to do. So what does a young man, almost 40, do? He just takes off and goes to France. And there I met a Japanese woman who was talking to me about Japan. And it raised my curiosity about Japan. I never even thought about it much. And so this Japanese woman is now my wife. And it triggered this whole thing where I wanted to go look around the world a little bit, and especially visit her in Japan. And I did that. And I wrote a book about that Japan part, Big Light. And the book is not a happy ending. And Japan turned out to be a very difficult, but super fascinating country for me. And after Japan, I didn't want to go home. So that was that. I went from Japan to Vietnam, and then from there overland to China. And I just worked my way across Asia, in Mongolia, Russia, and then up hitchhiking through the Scandinavia back down south. And, that just took a long time. And then I went from Spain to Africa and spent 6 months in Africa and overland mostly. So it just went from one thing to another. And in the end, I spent 3 years traveling, and that was never planned. It was just one step at a time kind of thing. And at some point, I decided I was done. I needed to go home. And home at that point was Oklahoma. And so I had a condo there, and I went home. And then I constructed a new life for me.
Wow. I mean, that's quite the story. I mean, I guess I'm curious. Obviously, as you're going traveling around and you're learning a lot, seeing a lot of different cultures. When you came back to the States, you didn't make the decision to go right back into the automotive industry or business again. I mean, were there any key things that you kind of developed during that time traveling that ended up really altering the rest of the course of your life?
Well, one thing I did was I really improved my French because I spent probably about a year in French-speaking countries, so in France mostly, but also in Africa. And I worked hard on it. So I became, fluent in French. And I studied French before as an adult, and I've gone to France taking language courses in France. But so this was really different. Now I was at a different level. And I wanted to really do something more internationally. And I ended up doing that. I ended up running a VC-funded startup company in Belgium, and then worked a lot on Wall Street and did different things. And I never wanted to go back to the car business itself. I followed it, and I have a passion for it, and I get really pissed off when the automakers do stupid stuff. But I don't want to work in it anymore.
Yeah, gotcha. Well, very interesting. And yeah, I mean, that's just that amalgamation, all those experiences is kind of what makes, I think, your commentary and what you write so incredibly interesting. Well, I want to go ahead and start digging into one of your favorite topics because I think it is of strong interest to our audience as well. And that's commercial real estate. Here coming in our, I guess I can call it post-pandemic world, is there still a glut of office space out there? And do you see that getting any better or worse, or what's going on?
Yeah, I mean, office is probably among the worst sectors in commercial real estate. They're all having problems now because of the higher interest rates. But the office sector on top of that, has a structural problem in that before the pandemic, the major companies perceived there to be an office shortage. And so every time office space came on the market, they jumped on it to grow into it and for future use. And I mean, Facebook leased a whole building in the tower, in San Francisco, and this kind of stuff. And they didn't need it. And they didn't need it then. And then we had the pandemic, and we had working from home, and that with all these executives sitting around the house and nothing to do and making decisions from a distance, they realized, wait a minute, we don't need all this space. We've got people working at home. We've always had some people working at home, so now we've got more of that. We're never going to grow into this office space. And they started massively putting this stuff back on the sublease market, and they pulled back from the direct leasing market, and companies that owned their own buildings put them up for sale. And so now we have this huge amount of vacant office space sitting on the market for lease. In some cities, in quite a few cities, it's around 30% of the total inventory is on the market for lease. So that includes San Francisco, it includes Dallas, it includes Houston, it includes a whole bunch of other cities. In some of the smaller office cities like St. Louis and Tulsa, it's like a depression there in terms of the office sector. And so there really isn't a good solution to that. Interest rates can go down. It's not going to change the structural issues of the office sector. And so the industry is grappling with this. And in San Francisco, where I live, I follow this a little more closely. And for a while, there weren't any sales of office buildings. Now we've had a few. They were at discounts of 65, 70% of the prices that they were at before the pandemic. A lot of buildings are essentially being sold for land value with the intent of either tearing them down or spending a huge amount of money converting them into residential. And ultimately, this will be good. I would love to see downtowns, financial districts, et cetera, become much more mixed, so more residential involved along with office. I think that would be a great thing because now these business districts At night, they're dead. There's nobody there.
Right.
And,
Mhm.
and and it's really good to have a mixed environment where people live and where they work and where they play. And in San Francisco, the financial district is right next to the waterfront. It's beautiful. And there's some towers around it, but not a lot. They would really benefit from mixed use. In Manhattan, that's already the case. They've already converted over the decades a whole bunch of older office buildings into residential, including when I was living there. There's some of them that came on the market that had been office buildings, and they did a pretty good job. So that can be done, especially with older buildings. And I'm really looking forward to that. That will enhance our city centers, I think. But it's just brutal out there for investors and for lenders. Thankfully, biggest lenders to the office sector aren't the banks. I mean, that's part of it. But the investors, life insurance companies, pension funds, international banks, collateralized loan obligations, commercial mortgage-backed securities. I mean, these are the primary lenders to the office sector, not necessarily the U.S. banks. And so, thankfully, the risks are not really taking down the banks as much as we might. And that's a good thing. And these lawsuits are spread across the globe, across investors. But it's just brutal out there. It's a depression in that sector, and it's going to last. And the solution is conversion to residential or tearing them down.
I never even thought about that conversion to residential. It makes a lot of sense, though. Very interesting.
Yeah, when you hear some of the experts talk about this, it's only a very small number of buildings that you can even do that with. They have to have a fairly narrow footprint. These big square buildings, big square footprints. You have to have windows in apartments and condos. You can't live in a windowless environment, and you have to have windows you can open. And so they're experimenting with putting a big air shaft in the middle of a square building and those kinds of things. But it's not easy to convert a 1980s office building into residential. It may be impossible. So they will pick and choose the ones that they can convert, and the rest will sell for land value to new investors, and they redevelop it.
Very interesting. I have a friend who has a business in Chicago, and about 10 years ago, they leased a couple floors on a office building near O'Hare and, spent a lot of money on the build out and getting it all right for them and everything. And, then of course, about 6 years into that, COVID hit, and now they're all working from home. So they actually have walked away from the end of their lease or maybe a little early and are moving to a smaller space, a little bit more outside of town. But it's interesting, that building they're in. I'm thinking, gosh, could that be residential? It is a neat location right near O'Hare. But you're right, it's kind of a big block also. So
Well,
I'm not sure.
Also, when I was living in Washington, D.C. area, I lived in Roslyn. So that was in the flight path of the airport. And I mean, you can scratch the bellies of the planes going by, and on the way down, they're not that loud, but on the way up, it's just atrocious. And back then, they stopped the traffic at around 11 o'clock at night, and they started at 6. So those are the 7 hours you can sleep. And you can't be on the phone when that happens. So putting residential into the area of an airport, I think you have to spend lots of money soundproofing the building.
Sure, makes sense. Well, you wrote recently about what you see as far as the possible impact of AI on commercial real estate. Can you kind of clue us in on that a little bit?
Yeah, that came from the real estate industry, actually. I really hadn't thought that much about it. And AI, I mean, people make fun of it, and we as consumers are in contact with it now all the time. We deal with the chatbots, and we got the major hospital chains and doctor offices, and they use AI in their interpretation of medical tests. And they also have a doctor look at it, but if you get an EKG, the system in there will tell you what you have. And the same with scans and other things. So AI has already moved into every aspect of our lives and has been for a long time. There's nothing new. What's newer is this generative AI, so that produces news stories and pictures and videos and summaries and analyses and reports, all kinds of stuff. And that used to take lots of man hours to do. And now it takes seconds with AI, and some of the news reporting has been generated by AI already. Some of the major ones are using it, like Bloomberg and Reuters and so forth, and MarketWatch, and they may or may not disclose that this was produced by AI. And what one person used to do in a day, AI can do in seconds. And I call AI a generative AI produces a lot of quote fluent bullshit. And but humans do that too. It's not like humans don't. And I don't know. Sometimes AI may be better than humans, but it's everywhere. And so what we're seeing now is companies replacing humans with AI. So they may have an editor editing 20 AI stories a day instead of 20 reporters writing them and one editor editing them. So, and that's happening, and it's happening in other industries. And so you're reducing, and it happens in coding, in tech, in customer service, and all kinds of stuff, and in advertising. And what people used to do, some of the basic stuff is now done by AI. And so the real estate industry sees this as a further shoe to drop on it. So when, not now, not today, but sometime in the nearer future, that it will reduce office employment further and will reduce the requirement for office space. And it's on top of the issues we already have. They're seeing this coming down the road. And rather than the office market bottoming out, they think that maybe it might still have those challenges ahead of it.
Very interesting. Yeah, sometimes you don't think about the far-reaching impacts of technology, but can be significant. So let's switch and talk a little bit about manufacturing infrastructure. And seems like there are a lot of plants being built in the U.S. right now. In fact, one of the most noteworthy is the Intel plant going up near us in Columbus, Ohio right now, or on the outskirts of Columbus. Who are some of the movers and shakers you're seeing in this manufacturing and infrastructure? Do you think this is sustainable? Is it going to continue?
Well, right now, the biggies that get all the headlines are the semiconductor manufacturers. They're setting up huge, expensive plants in multiple states. And you mentioned one of them. But they're big time in Arizona. And I mean, where's Arizona going to get the water to supply these plants long term? I mean, that's going to be an issue. But yeah, they are throwing billions of dollars at these plants. And a big plant like that, the construction cost is not the main thing in it. The main expense is equipping it and then getting it to work, training the people, those kinds of things. And it can run up to $20 billion to do one of those plants. So this is a huge input in the economy. These are massive movements that we're seeing, and I'm tracking the construction spending on factories. And so that's dollars spent on building the factories, not putting the equipment into them. And that has tripled over the last few years. So the United States has been way behind in manufacturing expansion, and we've kind of offshored all of this. The pandemic has taught everybody that the risks involved. The United States ran out of a whole bunch of stuff. We had shortages on everything. I mean, I remember you talking about the shortages you ran into, Todd. I ran into shortage with my beer mugs that I sent out as gifts. And I mean, everything was impacted by that. And it taught people a lesson about how not to become too dependent on China and on imports. And it taught people a lesson about how expensive it really is to manufacture offshore and to bring this stuff in, and you lose your intellectual property, especially semiconductors and autos and high-speed trains and that kind of stuff. And there's a huge corporate rethink now going on in trying to manage that better. Now, before then, we already had a huge change in the United States that started with fracking in 2010, 2012, when fracking for natural gas and then for crude oil became commercially very viable. And since then, the United States sort of ran out. So before 2007, 8, people thought the United States would run out of natural gas and we would have to, beg the Saudis to sell us more oil. And since then, the United States has become the largest natural gas producer in the world. In 2014, that's when we did that. We've become last year the largest liquefied natural gas exporter in the world because we're overproducing. We're producing so much that we're exporting large amounts via pipeline to Mexico and a smaller amount to Canada, but a very large amount now via LNG to other countries, including Europe, when it ran into trouble with its supply from Russia. And we've become the largest crude oil producer in the world. We're producing more petroleum products than we use. So we've become a net exporter of those products. We may import crude oil and export and refine them. Yeah, here in California and in the Bay Area, we've got a bunch of refineries that import crude oil and export gasoline, jet fuel, diesel to South America. And this is a huge trade. And this has caused energy prices in the United States to be far below what they are in Europe. And that has been the case for years. Our natural gas prices here in the United States, they've collapsed. I mean, they're lower than they were 15, 20 years ago, and because of overproduction. And so we have seen a lot of European manufacturers set up shop here in the United States due to their low cost of energy. And that happened years ago. That started years ago, and it continues. The petrochemical industry, a lot of European companies have moved in. It's the industries that use a lot of natural gas, either as input or for energy purposes. And so that is a manufacturing trend that predates the pandemic. And that has been one of the big drivers in growth in that sector. Now we've got the reshoring going on. So these are mostly American manufacturers, or in semiconductors, it's foreign manufacturers also that set up shop here. In the mechanical, electromechanical industry, Siemens, the German company, has been setting up shop here in the recent years to manufacture electrical equipment. Trains are starting to be manufactured. So commuter trains, those kinds of things are starting to be manufactured here. This is a slow process. And it's not like we're bringing these jobs back. It's not that process where we send, 20 million jobs to China. Now we're bringing 20 million jobs back. What we're doing is we're expanding in the United States, and there are new jobs being created here in manufacturing. And they're not, in many cases, they're highly qualified people to work in a semiconductor plant. You may have to have an advanced degree in one of the STEM fields. In many other manufacturing areas, you have to be highly trained. Many jobs require college degrees, technical degrees. So it's a different kind of manufacturing than what it was decades ago. So the jobs are different. They're fewer. There are not as many jobs in the plant, but they're much more highly qualified and probably more difficult to fill. And you can't just take a bunch of immigrants and stick them in the plant. That doesn't work anymore. So it's changing the economy here. And manufacturing is only a relatively small part of the U.S. economy, but it has a huge secondary and tertiary impact on the rest of the economy. And so overall, I think what we're looking at is kind of a U-turn from 2 decades of offshoring.
So the plants they're building, I mean, surely they are concerned about how they're going to find workers. And you brought up a good point. It's not like those construction workers can just become factory workers now. And so you hit, some equilibrium that way. Do you see that being a lot of folks coming into the country in order to fill some of those jobs, or what do you see happening there?
Well, we already got those folks here. They came in. We according to estimates from the Congressional Budget Office, the last 2 years, we got 6 million people in here. So that's a huge number of people. Of course, most of them will not be qualified to work in these manufacturing plants. And they'll be driving Ubers and they'll be doing other stuff, and they're making sandwiches and doing different things. And some of them may be qualified, but may take some time in training. The solution is to train. And we've abandoned manufacturing as a country for a long time. So there's a lot of things that we've walked away from, a lot of expertise. The older people retired and the younger people haven't learned it. And so this is a process we have to go through. And it's not instant. So you have to train the people. I mean, they're even short on construction workers. It's not like we have enough construction workers. So when they have these big projects, they have trouble building them because it's labor issues. And so, it's not like we can build a plant and then stick 500 immigrants into it to work. That's not how it works. It will require a lot of training. A lot of schools will have to get involved. And companies will have to tell the educational system what they need. And long-term process, it will be good, but it's going to have some rough spots, I think.
Yeah, it's very interesting. It's not like you can have someone one day using a spatula and the next day they're working in one of these high-tech factories. So, well, last time we talked, we were really very much in the midst of a lot of supply chain difficulties. And I know that seems to be better at some point. I do think there are some ongoing ramifications. I know one of the ramifications we have seen as a manufacturer is, even though maybe supply has gotten better, as a smaller company, it seems like we don't mean as much to our suppliers as we did before all that happened. But can you reflect some on the state of things as far as supply chain right now?
Yeah, like you said, most of the problems, the large problems, have been addressed. They're sort of back to normal. There are still issues. I mean, the big one was the auto industry with the semiconductor shortages, and that just kind of shut down the industry. And that's a huge industry in the United States. Auto manufacturing, all the major Japanese automakers, everyone who sells in the United States manufactures in the United States or in Mexico, and they all had issues and shut down production or slow production, and that's largely removed. So now we have plenty of production of vehicles in the United States. They're piling up. That's good. And when the prices are starting to come down a little bit, and that's good. That's what consumers need. So I don't. There may still be some issues on some specific products, but overall, that industry looks like it's getting what it needs, and it's putting out cars. And many automakers are producing a lot more cars than they're selling. So they have restocked, and now they've overstocked, and so now they need to cut their big fat profit margins and cut prices, and that's kind of a painful thing to do, but that's the next step. In the building industry, occasionally you run into problems. I mean, there's occasionally issues. We look at the indices of supply chain issues, and they're essentially back to normal. It looks like. So we've seen geopolitical issues crop up, and less so here than in Europe, but with the issues in the Middle East. Shipments that were routed through the Suez Canal are now being routed around it. So that has delayed by months all kinds of shipments. And, Tesla and other companies have complained about that. They've got a bunch of cars made in China stuck on car carriers, and they're going around Africa to get where they need to go and to Europe. And, so that's a new issue in terms of trans-Pacific trade. That really doesn't impact us, but prices have come up. So shipping prices have come up. And so we're seeing a little bit of that. But overall, I think we're in pretty decent shape in terms of supply.
What about housing? What are some of the hot markets right now, or bubbles, if you will, where supply is short, prices are high? And are there any markets out there maybe where there's a housing glut? I doubt there are, but just kind of curious to reflect on that and how mortgage rates are influencing things.
In terms of mortgage rates, let's start with that. People who have 3% mortgages, they're not particularly incentivized to sell the house and to buy a new house. Mm-hmm. So that's the classic thing. When you get older, maybe you want a smaller house, or you want to get a different job. You sell your house, buy a new one in a different city, or you want a bigger house, and that has slowed down a lot. So people who have these mortgages, these 3% mortgages, have essentially, many of them have stepped away from the housing market. So they're not buying. So that's why demand is down so much. We had a huge plunge in demand, but they're not selling either. So we've had this huge plunge in supply and in inventory. And so this kind of went down together. And my estimate is that about 20% of the entire housing market stepped away from the housing market, just not there anymore. And they're not there as buyers, and they're not there as sellers. And so now we have the people that have to buy and sell because they did move to get a different job, and they have to sell the house, buy a new house, or they start a family, need to buy a house. And so there are people that are having to buy, and they're selling. Some of them are selling their existing house, so they're putting one on the market, and they're buying one. They're taking one off the market, so that's in balance. But then we have the younger generations coming in, they're first-time buyers, and they don't sell anything; they just buy. And they're counterbalanced by the older people selling and not buying, either because they die or they're moving to a home, or because they're moving to an apartment or some other facility. And the generation now that's moving out of the housing market very slowly was the largest generation ever, the boomers. And so now the generation that has moved into the housing market very strongly already are the millennials, and they're now the largest generation. And they're followed by Generation C, the big buyers too. So those two combined are the biggest home buyers now, and they're struggling. They make pretty good money overall, but interest rates are high and home prices are high, and they're eager to buy. And so they're the ones that are driving up the prices because they're the big force, and they're the buyers. They're in there, and they want to start a family, and they're eager. They're overbidding, and they're doing those kinds of things. And they've done that and for a few years. So that's the driving force behind the prices. And there's plenty of inventory. Active listings have risen now. We're in the fourth year in a row. So we've had a big plunge in active listings during the pandemic. And every year now. They've been higher. And so now they're the highest since before the pandemic. So there is enough inventory out there. It's no longer a shortage. The home builders are building at a very strong pace. They have a huge amount of inventory for sale, and they're cutting prices, and they're buying down mortgage rates. And they're doing all the things that they need to do to move their inventory, because they have to build homes. They cannot stop building homes. They're in the business to build homes. And so they will do that, and they will do whatever it takes to move them. And they're making smaller homes. They're making cheaper homes. They're squeezing the profit margins a little bit. So there's supply on the market. Their new homes are now, in terms of mortgage rates, when home builders buy down the mortgage rates, you can buy a new house for a smaller payment than you can buy an existing similar house. The dynamics are there for prices to come down. There's plenty of supply now, and we have this very strong buying force in the younger generation that's counterbalanced to some extent by the older generation getting out. But prices are just too high. And that's a problem. They're not too high in every market. You go to Tulsa, and prices have doubled in Tulsa the last few years. I mean, that's really bad too, but they were really low. So they've doubled from a really low level, and compared to San Francisco, they're still very low. And Tulsa, I used to live there for a long time, so I followed the market. I owned a condo that came up for sale, and I sold it for $210,000 back in, when was that, 2001 or something. And it was on the market for $160,000, sold for $160,000 in about 2016 or something like that. So that's the market in Tulsa. It just went downhill and downhill for a long, long time. And I bought the condo from a bank that then collapsed. And my neighbor bought his condo from the FDIC, the same bank. After it collapsed, FDIC picked it up. So there's a housing bust going on in Tulsa that lasted 20 years. And started in the 1980s, and prices didn't go up until a few years ago. So this happens. It happens in lots of cities. It's just the national averages kind of pave over that. And people say you can't lose money in real estate, or housing will never go down. Well, in the local markets, housing can go down and can stay down for decades. So we have some markets that are still pretty hot, and we have other markets that are not. And we have a shift towards higher end homes that are now selling. So all the median prices are shifting up, because the larger share of homes that sell are higher end homes, because a lot of times they don't need to finance, or they have plenty of money to make the higher mortgage payments. What we're not seeing is the lower end selling. So we have seen an increase in median prices simply because of the shift. Not that the prices actually changed, but there were more expensive homes in the mix, and that pushed up the median price. So it's a really screwed up market right now. I call it a frozen market, because demand is down by 20-25%. Supply is down, has been down for a long time, but it's been coming up from the low levels because not enough demand. And so the inventory sits longer, and sellers don't want to get these aspirational prices. So they're loath to cut the prices. And so you have this dynamic where the houses that do sell at a still fairly high price. And some cities like Austin and San Francisco and others have seen significant price declines. And some of the tech cities in some other parts, in Southern California, you have price increases. But that's the dynamic we're seeing. We're seeing a plunge in demand. We're seeing very high prices and high mortgage rates that don't work together. The demand has plunged because you can't make it work. You can't make those high prices with 7% mortgages work. And it just will take years to work out. I don't think there is a solution to that other than taking your time and waiting for this to settle down somehow.
Very interesting. I want to talk a little bit about back during COVID. We heard a lot about people starting businesses, and I think there were record numbers of businesses being started back in 2020, 2021. Any idea how those businesses are doing now, 3 years into the whole thing? I'm just kind of curious. Are they making it, or what's going on there?
Yeah, small businesses, with startups, that's a very risky thing to do. And among them, the riskiest thing to do is restaurants. And it's like 90% of restaurants don't survive the first 5 years or so. So the mortality rate of small businesses is very high, and we don't really track that. What we do track is businesses that are no longer there. So when they disappear, but it could be that an owner sold the business, or after making a certain amount of money, they decided they're going to retire and they shut it down. So it includes all kinds of things. So we don't really know how many businesses fail in that sense. And we call it business failures because they're gone, but we don't know why they're gone, because they sold or because the owner retired or because they went bankrupt. We can track bankruptcies, and a lot of small businesses don't owe a lot of money and they don't file for bankruptcy when it's not worth it anymore. And they don't have to. They just pay off their stuff and move on and get another job. And Gallup just came out with an interesting survey yesterday. And I'm just throw that in there. Americans love to be their own boss. And so they came up with this percentage, and it's the majority of Americans, 60-some% of Americans want to be their own boss. They don't want to work for the man anymore. And they're tired of it. And they want to strike out on their own and do their own thing. And only about a third of Americans want to work for somebody else, want to be employed by somebody else. And this is a huge mismatch because most Americans are actually employed, and, so that's a reality. And a lot of gig work, you're your own boss, but it doesn't pay and it's not worth it. So people, when they say they want to be their own boss, they're thinking about a profitable enterprise that they can do and maybe expand, maybe have some employees or maybe some consulting work that they can do after they leave the company. And so Gallup found that Americans are just really eager to do that. And the numbers of business starts, as you mentioned, spiked during the pandemic. And it's come down a little bit, but it still has remained at a very high level. People continue to start new businesses at a much higher than pre-COVID level. And I'm my own boss. And, I know, and you're your own boss. And we know that we're not really our own boss. We have bosses out there. They're our customers, they're our readers. And, we get bossed around all the time. It's not like you can decide whatever you want. But there's this sort of romantic view that if you're your own boss, you can decide what to do and you can be more creative. And people are, according to the Gallup poll, people are willing to take substantial financial risks to do this. And they go out on a limb to do this. And that's, of course, the American spirit. You take a huge risk to try to make it big. And if you fail, well, you get a job and do something else. This has grown after the pandemic. So this is not something that is always there, but it's a bigger thing now. And there's more interest in doing that and more people that are actually doing that. And that's quite an interesting creative force in the economy. And of course, we distinguish between businesses that will never hire anybody and businesses that have a high propensity to hire people. So the Census Bureau that tracks the stuff that has this category of high propensity businesses, startups, and companies that have funding, that have payroll coming. So when they apply for an employer identification number, that's how we track these business starts. Yeah, they're the ones that are likely to hire people. And that number is higher also than before the pandemic. It didn't jump as much, but it has also grown. And some of these companies are the famous startups that we hear about, but many hundreds of thousands of them that you'll never hear about. They're just small little companies employing a few people, and they're doing well, and the owners make nice amounts of money, and they're producing quality products and services, and everybody's happy. And it's happening across industries. So it's still there. It's working. The pandemic has changed a lot of things, and that's one of them.
Very interesting. You know so much about so many different topics. I'm kind of curious, what are you reading these days? Where do you get your knowledge from, or any good books you've been reading recently to recommend?
Well, I'm a huge reader of reports, daily reports, and stuff that is written or that's produced by various government agencies and private sector companies, all the data, economic, financial data, et cetera, that I report on. And I really live in the day now. So years ago, I'm talking years ago, over a decade ago, I stopped reading books. I just stopped. And I have 2 master's degrees. I have my last one, so that's from 1980s, the MBA in finance. But before that, I have a master's in English and literature and a bachelor's in literature and in English. And I have bookcases up to the ceiling, and I've read a gazillion books in my life. And I just cold stopped at some point, and I no longer read books. I live now in the day, and I can't recommend any books. I used to love reading books about novels about businesses that are based on a real life experience and the people fictionalized, and like Bombardier by Pope Bronson and some of those. But they came out a long time ago. And that's one of my all-time favorite books, Bombardier. It's about a bond trader when First Boston was still there, and they had a trading office in San Francisco. And so he worked at First Boston, and so that book reflects his experience, and it's just really fun to read. But I wouldn't, I just don't have the time anymore. I get up early and go to bed late, and I work all the time. And so being my own boss, you're your own worst boss.
Exactly. And I got to admit, I don't read near like I used to as far as books either. And we did have someone a few episodes ago who recommended a book called Freedom's Forge. And I bought that and read it. And that was really good. It was about what it took to ramp up for the production of weaponry and so forth during World War II, and how the automotive industry was a strong supporter of that, which I knew nothing about. So that was very interesting. Well, you live in San Francisco. How are things there these days?
Well, we love it. It's great, beautiful place. Right now, I'm looking out the window here, and we see a little bit of smoke from the wildfires move in. So that's starting with the time of the year. We've got the first fires in the Bay Area, and I mean that's a problem. The city itself is beautiful and attracts lots of tourists, and so we live in the touristy area, and you have to get used to being surrounded by tourists. And it's a little different. And there are a lot of tourists now. I mean, this place is packed with tourists, but we're close to the waterfront. It's just beautiful. And I go Financial District, that's half an hour on foot from here. And during the pandemic, during the lockdowns, I did a picture series on it. And it was just a rush hour in the Financial District, 8:00 in the morning, and it was just, there's nobody on the street. It was beautiful in a way, it was just sunrise in San Francisco in Financial District with nobody there. And it changed, so now there's plenty of people walking around going about the business, but it's not as packed. And like I said, a third of the office space is on the market fully. It's in other cities too. So there's less few people coming in. And San Francisco is sort of the epicenter of working from home. You have that going on. The people make lots of money here. The median household income is close to $130,000 a year. And they're spending lots of money, and young people make lots of money. And so we're knee deep in money here, which is bad because the city made too much money, and this is corruption and everything everywhere. We have a huge, gigantic budget. San Francisco is not a big city. We've got a budget that's bigger than most of the state's budgets. And it's just way too much money being thrown around. And I think the best thing that can happen to San Francisco would be just a recession that turns off the money spigot, and the San Francisco government has to reconsider its priorities. I mean, that's the big issue that I see. It's just how this money gets thrown around everywhere. And that's the problem I see. And that's really not changing. I mean, since the gold rush times, it's been the same thing. That's just what the city lives off. And it comes in from the outside. And it's tourists, and it's tech, and it's all this other stuff. It's venture capital, and it's jobs, and it's just a phenomenon. Having lived in Tulsa, where really there was, after the oil bust, during the oil boom in Tulsa, was knee deep in money too.
Sure.
I mean, all the major oil companies were headquartered there. They moved to Houston after the oil bust, and so they're gone. But when the money spigot gets turned off, it's really tough. But it hasn't yet in San Francisco. Money's still flowing.
Well, it's a beautiful city. It's been last time I was there about 6 years ago, and I've been kind of thinking I need to figure out a way to get out there again here before too long. So you just are watching everything, it seems. I'm curious, what keeps you awake at night?
Well, I'm trying to sleep at night, So,
Yeah.
I mean, we have a huge national problem in that we financialized everything. And
Mm.
and now everything is financialized. Everything is leveraged. The economy has become much more fragile because of that. And Wall Street is out there. Wall Street, meaning the broader construct, trying to financialize absolutely every little thing. And then it's used as collateral, and then it's used to bet and take risks. And the 15 years of interest rate repression, have furthered that along. And high interest rates are going to help to calm that down a little bit, but that's not a panacea either, because there's all these other issues that we now have to deal with. And so you raise the rates, your leverage is getting in trouble. And so we're going to have banks fail. We're going to have companies fail. We're going to have commercial real estate is already in a depression. A lot of these loans have already failed. So yeah, I think the financial and commercial real estate. So let me just talk a little bit about that, because that's what financialization means. In the olden days, an investor would fund the construction, or maybe the bank would fund the construction of an office tower. And then a company would buy that office tower, and either a landlord and lease it out, or a company direct, and then pay off the loan over time. And so you have this office tower on your books, and you depreciate the building to zero over 30 years, and you leave the land value at cost. And so when the price collapses of that office tower down the road, your loan's paid off, the building is depreciated to zero, and you're carrying in the land value at cost. So if you have to sell it, you're still going to get more than land value for it, the old land value, and your loan's paid off, and the building's depreciated. So you show a gain. And we've had a case like that here in San Francisco, where a bank sold a building it owned for many years, and it sold for a discount of 65% of asking price, but the bank didn't lose any money. Yeah, that was not a financialized building, and nobody got hurt with that the sales price got 65%. It was just an imaginary price cut, but there's no lenders involved that got a haircut. There's no issues in it, and the bank booked a profit on it. And so now what we have is office towers that were refinanced in 2020 or 2019, and these loans are coming. These are short-term loans. They're coming due. These are old office towers that were refinanced with huge amounts, and now there's lenders out there that put $500 million into this office tower that's worth $500 million into an office tower that's now worth $100 million or less. And so that's what financialization does. We've taken a real estate product and turned it into a financialized product. And the loan was sold to mortgage-backed security holders, was chopped up in little pieces and sold to retail investors, to bond funds, to pension funds, to all kinds of things. And so now the losses are rippling through the financial sector that way, when there really shouldn't be any losses if the building owner, the original one, had kept it on the books, hadn't refinanced it, and could now sell it for land value at a profit. And that's the system that's now everywhere. Everything has been leveraged. Everything has been financialized. And that keeps me up at night, because this is risk. This is a high risk situation we're in. And the Fed's trying to manage that, to try to sort of tamp down on the risk carefully, but not blow up something. And I don't know, that keeps me awake at night. I don't know that we'll manage to solve that problem.
Very interesting. Well, Wolf, thank you very much. This has been a great time together. We're close to the end of things, or at least what we call the business end of things. Is there anything we haven't covered yet today that you wanted to be sure to share with our audience?
Well, make sure you come to my site, wolfstreet.com, business, finance, and money. That's all we talk about now. Politics, vibrant, usually well-behaved commenting section. And Todd has commented a few times himself there. Very welcome comments. And so join us there.
Very good. And we will put that in the show notes as well. So before we close out, I am going to ask you if you're willing to participate. You did this first time you're on the show, in something we call our rapid fire questions. These are 7 questions, and all you got to do is give an answer that comes to mind. I've made sure we have not asked any of the questions we asked last time. So are you willing to participate in rapid fire?
Okay, I got to keep it short then, right?
Yeah, you can, as long as you want. Well, let's do it. I'll let Ethan ask the first one. Now, you may want to temper this question now that we've talked to him, or come up with another one. It's up to you.
Yeah, I don't want to upset the equilibrium here, but the first question is not going to work. So I'll pick something maybe more fun. But okay, I got one. One of our favorites is, so who is one person you would take with you in a zombie apocalypse?
Okay, my wife.
There you go. Good answer. Question number 2. What is your biggest pet peeve?
Biggest one.
Biggest one. Oh, he's debating hard here.
Right. Just go through my list right now. Commenters on my website dragging in BS from the internet that they picked up somewhere.
Gotcha. Yeah. Understand that.
What's a cause you're passionate about?
Healthy living.
Nice.
Love it. Next question. If you could time travel to any point in time, what would it be? Or what time would it be?
Well, I'd like to figure out how the Neanderthals lived.
There you go. That sounds like a rough
Be
time to
cool.
time travel to, but
I've got some of their blood, so
they might be chasing you around. You might be their next meal.
All right, next one. If you could instantly become an expert on any topic, what would that topic be?
well, it's got to be something good. There's a lot of bad experts out there.
Yeah, true.
Let's see. Expert meaning somebody who's really good at something, not just who pretends to be an expert, but who really nails it,
Nails it or knows about it.
knows about it. Yeah.
Not knowledge.
Yeah. I would love to understand how the technical aspects of my work function. So that's essentially the issues surrounding servers and the internet.
Very cool. Yeah.
Because I
Good
don't,
answer.
I have problems on my site and I don't even know how to deal with it. So
Yeah, I hear you. A lot of us experience those. What is the most challenging thing you recall ever doing?
starting the site, wolfstreet.com.
That would be tough. I mean, how do you gain an audience? How do you make that happen? That's got to be difficult.
Well, if you know how hard it is, you're probably not going to start. That's the good thing. You just walk into it and you say, I'm going to start this. And you have no idea how hard it actually is. But then it's super rewarding when you get there.
How is the beer mug supply chain recent? Has it gotten better?
Well, so I never could get the beer mug that I wanted, the original mug, and I needed them. I had a long list of people that were on my mug list, and so my mug flow forecast, it was completely wrong because I couldn't get anything done, and so I switched models. So now I have a Generation 2 mug, and that's a little more slender than the other one, and a little more elegant and less stocky. And I think it did pretty well. And I don't sell them. They have artwork on them from a San Francisco artist, and I give them out as gifts or larger donations to my site. And so there's really no price. So the last batch, I order them by the pallet. So the last batch I got was the one that they had. It's not what I wanted, but it's the one that they had. And so that was a year and a half ago, maybe. And back then, you still had to order what they had, not what you wanted. And now I think it's changed. Now, probably if I needed another order, I can probably get what I want instead of what they have. But I still have enough. And what I noticed is my shipping costs have jumped, and they have come down a little bit, but they've gone up 40% and over the pandemic. And so when I ship them out, and they've come down a little bit, but they haven't come back down to where they were. So in terms of supply chain, the shipping costs are still there.
Yeah, shipping costs have been really huge impact on our business, that's for sure. So I encourage folks, if you go to wolfstreet.com, you can find out what this beer mug talk was all about. But that's pretty cool. Okay, last question, Ethan.
Yeah. This one's a fun one. It's interesting to hear different answers from people, but is there a product or service that you've recently purchased or found out about that's been kind of a game changer for you?
My hair clippers.
Really? Okay.
Started cutting my own hair during the pandemic, and I'm not going back. And my old barber died before the pandemic, and then I went to another set, and they were pretty good, but it's just hit and miss. And guys handling power tools, kind of fun to do, and
It's a good way to look at it. Yeah.
So what's the brand? What do you know offhand?
Oyster, maybe.
Oyster. Oh, okay.
Yeah. It's
Oyster.
it's not for professional
Yeah.
barbers. It's just for people like me that do it once a month. Yeah.
Well, my barber about 30 years ago has said, Todd, I can't take your money anymore. So I had to figure out how to do it myself at that point. Well, this has been great. Thank you again, Wolf. I really enjoyed this. For folks who do want to get in touch with you, follow what you're doing, go ahead and give us that information again.
wolfstreet.com. So everything's there. Everything's free. No paywall. Just join.
And I got to say, he loves comments. He does always have some great comments to what he posts, and he often responds to them too. So it's a great place to hang out and follow what he does. So good stuff. So I think we were all successful getting our challenge words out. And Ethan, I apologize. I used yours at one point too without even really thinking about it. Ethan, your word was?
Mine was equilibrium. I kind of shoved it in there, but I had maybe a better opportunity earlier. But yeah, I used it very well, Todd. So give you extra credit.
And the word I had was spatula. Yeah, I worked in there. Said you might trade your spatula for a different job. And Wolf, your word was?
Well, I have to say, Todd, yours was an amazing use of the word spatula.
Yeah.
That was great. So my word was panacea.
Which you worked in extremely well. Thank you.
Yes.
Good stuff. Well, thank you again. And thank you to our audience for tuning into this very special episode of Construction Disruption with the inimitable Wolf Richter of wolfstreet.com. Please watch for future episodes of our podcast. We always have great guests. Don't forget to leave a review, please. Until the next time we're together, keep on disrupting, keep on challenging, keep on looking for better ways of doing things. And don't forget to do kind things for others. Simple, powerful ways you can change the world just by interacting with others. So God bless and take care. This is Isaiah Industries signing off until the next episode of Construction Disruption.
This podcast is produced by Isaiah Industries, manufacturer of specialty metal roofing and other building products.